When the line between humanitarian aid and geopolitical influence blurs, the world's most vulnerable often pay the price. That's the explosive accusation now shaking global civil society, as over 130 aid organizations call for the shutdown of the U.S. and Israeli-backed Gaza Aid Initiative. The Gaza Relief Project, the very entity created to provide life-saving assistance, is now accused of deepening suffering and sidelining impartial aid efforts in one of the world's most volatile regions. At the center of the storm is a newly formed humanitarian group, publicly supported by the U.S. and Israeli governments, which claims to deliver essential food, water, and medicine to war-ravaged civilians in Gaza. On paper, it's a coordinated effort to ease the humanitarian toll of the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict, but in practice, many say it has become a symbol of politicized aid delivery. Over 130 international and local NGOs, including Oxfam, Norwegian Refugee Council, and Médecins Sans Frontières, have issued a joint statement rejecting the group's legitimacy, arguing it undermines established relief efforts and allows military powers to control access and narrative. Critics claim the initiative violates core humanitarian principles of neutrality, impartiality, and independence. By embedding the aid process within Israeli and U.S. strategic frameworks, it allegedly marginalizes Palestinian-run aid networks, raises severe trust issues among recipients, and exposes civilians to further risks. This is not aid, it's occupation policy dressed as relief, said one field director anonymously to BBC News. The timing of this uproar amid increasing death tolls, displacement, and Israeli military operations in Gaza has poured fuel on an already combustible international debate. The backlash against the U.S. Israeli initiative is more than a regional squabble, it is fast becoming a diplomatic powder keg. At the United Nations, multiple member states including South Africa, Brazil, and Indonesia have called for an independent review of aid practices in occupied territories. Meanwhile, the Biden administration has doubled down on support, defending the project as vital and life-saving, and accusing critics of politicizing humanitarian needs. This clash of narratives underscores a deepening divide between Western policy actors and the global South over how international law and human rights are selectively applied. Even among traditional U.S. allies in Europe, discomfort is growing. France and Ireland have both hinted at concerns over the project's transparency and its impact on the neutrality of aid operations. Humanitarian watchdogs have also raised alarm over potential violations of international humanitarian law if aid becomes a tool to exert pressure or control populations under siege. Weaponized aid, one analyst warned, could become the new frontier of asymmetric conflict for the people of Gaza, where over 30,000 have reportedly died since the onset of the latest escalation. The dispute is not about diplomacy, but survival, with only a fraction of essential aid entering through Rafah and Kerem Shalom crossings, and widespread infrastructure destruction crippling hospitals, power stations, and sanitation. Residents are left in limbo. The growing perception that some aid is tied to surveillance, political compliance, or uneven distribution is further eroding public trust. Historically, aid manipulation has appeared in conflict zones from Somalia to Syria, but Gaza may now represent a tipping point. Analysts warned that continued politicization could collapse remaining aid operations altogether, pushing Gaza deeper into a humanitarian abyss. Civil society organizations argue that only a UN-led, independent mechanism free from military or political entanglements can restore credibility and provide the population with the dignity and relief they deserve. This crisis raises an unsettling question: who gets to define aid during wartime? When powerful states fund, brand, and operate relief under their own agendas, is it still humanitarian or a form of soft power warfare? The answer may determine not only Gaza's fate but the credibility of global humanitarian law itself. Watch the full investigation and join the global debate.
30 of the world's largest charities and aid agencies are calling for the closure of the controversial Israeli US-backed food distribution system in Gaza. Organizations including Oxfam, Save the Children and Amnesty International have accused the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation of flouting all international norms since taking over aid distribution from the UN in May. Israel carried out dozens of air raids across Gaza on Monday, including one at a popular internet beach cafe in Gaza City. The Hamas-run health ministry said at least 60 people had been killed. The Israeli military has not yet commented. It comes as the White House announced that U.S. President Donald Trump will host Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu next week. Well, let's go live to Jerusalem now and speak to our correspondent, Wira Davies. And Wira, just talk us through some of the concerns raised by these charities and aid agencies.
Well, look, this relatively new aid organisation, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is Israeli-backed and American-funded, has been operating in Gaza now controversially for about a month. Now, according to various sources from within Gaza, more than 500 people have been killed in and around aid distribution points belonging to GHF since the start of its operations. We've also heard from whistleblowers speaking to an Israeli newspaper from the Israeli army saying that they were ordered to fire on crowds of people even if they weren't posing a threat around these aid distribution points. Now, one of the reasons it's also controversial is because they've got 4 centres, 3 of them in southern Gaza, which means that tens of thousands of people seeking aid have to come to these centres, often in large crowds. It's chaotic. People have been killed. People have died around these centres. And the older charities like Oxfam, Save the Children, they're saying that the existing UN mechanism where aid was taken to much smaller distribution centres, 400 of them across Gaza, which was much more effective and it was far less dangerous. And they've accused the GHF of not going by the normal norms. And this letter, which has been signed by 130 aid organisations, wants a return to the old system, not perfect, but the old system of getting aid to the people in Gaza who need it.
And now, with the announcement of the Prime Minister's visit to Washington, yet another trip for the Prime Minister to Washington, how significant will that be?
Well, look, there is pressure on all sides to achieve a ceasefire. 21 months into the war, more than 55,000 people killed in Gaza, 21 or 22 live hostages still being held in Gaza, and the bodies of maybe 25 others. Many people have been saying for a long time now that Israel has achieved all it can militarily in Gaza. Israel is continuing to lose soldiers in Gaza. Last month it was a record month for a long time for the number of Israeli soldiers killing Gaza. And of course, as you were pointing out, dozens of people, civilians in Gaza, were killed in Israeli airstrikes yesterday, and that's been the case for several days now. So huge pressure for a peace deal or a ceasefire to be agreed upon. Donald Trump among those putting pressure even on Israel to try and achieve that. Perhaps there might be a breakthrough if Netanyahu sits down with Mr. Trump next week. Perhaps it'll be the start of something, because neither side is really talking indirectly at the minute, and there are still very significant sticking points between the Israelis and Hamas before we get to any ceasefire.
Wira, thank you. That's our correspondent, Wira Davies, in Jerusalem there.